any case, let's get started. I'm very pleased to introduce Martin Lipman, talking to us today about standpoint pluralism and the problem of test token truths.
So I'm going to talk about two things: standpoint pluralism and the problem of test token truths. Basically, what I will do is I will introduce this this sort of non-standard view of time, which I take to be a version of fragmentalism. So I'll introduce sort of fragmentalist thinking in very broad terms first, and then I'll discuss this problem that's familiar, and then I will outline what this non-standard view would say about this problem, in a way as a way of further elucidating this view. More or less, I don't have time to kind of go through, eliminate the alternative responses. So you will probably think that there's another possible response to this problem, and there are other possible responses, but I won't have time to kind of go through all of them. I will bring them up in the Q&A. Okay, so just to introduce the fragmentalist sort of way of thinking. So it can be helpful to kind of start with time-specific facts. So we kind of take there to be times, and then there are these sort of they come with sort of their own little bubbles of facts that kind of involve these times. So what I mean is, for example, a fact like at T1 I'm sitting. Let's say at T2 I'm standing. Okay. So there are these sort of time-specific facts, and then you can have a B-theoretic sort of internal debate about how best to construe these time-specific facts. Perhaps with temporal parts, perhaps by relationalizing these temporal properties, perhaps in some other way. But there will be sort of time-specific. Then I take this to be broadly the B-theoretic camp. Then I think there's this this view which says, like, look, besides these time-specific facts, we have simple facts like sitting, like me sitting. Yes, there's me sitting at a specific time. Fine, that's a type of fact, and we can think about what sort of fact that is. But then there's also this thing of me sitting, or me standing, or what have you. So a typical sort of theoretic view will take there to be one privileged time such that all the facts that you get relative to that time, so all the sort of facts that are sort of time specific there, you also get obtaining sort of without involving the time. Right? So it's almost as if you get all these facts translated to sort of simple facts. So a simple B theory would just be this sort of block. The simple A theory would be this block plus these sort of simple facts about people sitting, standing, things being round or heavy or having some sort of mass, what have you. Now, and I take all of this to be corrected. So I take this sort of a theoretic point that we get these sort of simple facts as well. I take that to be correct. So in that sense, I have a theoretic inclinations. But there's also this point of like, well, look, there's us right here, right now, thinking and experiencing and talking and having this conference. And so we are somewhere in time, and our thoughts and experiences are going on at a specific time. But that doesn't make a specific time special. And then if you take that away, it becomes difficult to think about what is sort of metaphysically special about a certain time. What makes sort of a certain time metaphysically stand out? I do think that the atheist has good answers to that, but I also think there are very good reasons, multiple reasons. I won't go into all of them. One of them has also to do with relativity, so special relativity. I mean, but there are good reasons to think that perhaps we shouldn't be privileging one time. And then you get to add further simple facts. Now you get also the simple facts of other times. Facts like standing, I'm standing. But now, of course, you get okay. Now, now we've gone one step too far. We've lapsed into incoherence. Right now, you get to me sitting and me not sitting. You're now contradicting yourself. Incoherence. So you've taken it one step too many. And then the fragmentalist sees that as a challenge, as it were, to kind of make sense of that. Find a coherent way of making sense of that. So there is Fine's way of making sense of that, which I won't go into detail, but it's sort of restricting this move to simple facts to fundamental reality and taking the fundamental reality as it were. So it's almost as if you take a bit of it, the fundamental bit, and take that to be there. So you get, and then you get a kind of fragmented picture, and you don't get these. I won't go into detail. There's other ways of being a fragmentalist, and I was defending earlier in earlier work one of these ways of being fragmentalist, and I've come to really dislike it. And now I think that really what's needed is just more logical and more conceptual tools to make sense of this. So it's almost as if our ordinary ways of thinking, especially classical logic, is geared towards the facts that we find at a single standpoint. It's almost as if, and this sounds maybe a little disrespectful of classical logic, but it's almost as if classical logic is parochial. It's tied towards sort of facts that we find at a certain point. Okay, so that's kind of the background to this. So I'm going to introduce a different way of somehow making sense of this metaphysical picture, a different way of being a fragmentalist. And I'm going to illustrate how it responds to this problem. So what I think is that, I think at least one way that's at least interesting to explore is by thinking that there is this kind of logical structure that you always find within the facts that are given to a single standpoint. Right? So like a set like this will have a certain logical structure, and you will see that kind of logical structure here. But that there's a different logical structure when you take the sort of inclusive sense of reality. So I've been inclining towards a sort of form of logical pluralism, where you take cross-perspectival reality or inclusive reality to exhibit a slightly different logical structure than you're familiar. So what you get now is this picture that there are these incompatible facts that you find relative to different standpoints, but you cannot sort of think that that's the case using ordinary conjunction, for example. So what needs to be done is you need to kind of introduce a different notion of logical consequence. And this is on the handout. It's going to be called immersion. I'm going to say that whenever using sort of ordinary classical logic, you can prove that there is a standpoint relative to which B is the case. B is any. If you can prove that there's a standpoint relative to which B is the case, so you can prove like in the time case that one of these time-specific facts relative to which this bit, then you get in this new sense of validity, you get that very thing itself being the case. So if given certain premises, there exists a standpoint relative to which B, then I'm going to allow that you can go from A, these premises, to B itself. With this notion, notion of validity or this notion of logical consequence, you get this idea that you can go from something being the case relative to a standpoint to its simply being the case. So it's almost as if being the case at a standpoint or being the case at a time becomes a factive notion, but not factive in the ordinary classical way, in this newly introduced sense. It implies in this external way. I'm going to call this external validity. Now, there's one really important property here that helps to see. So I cannot sketch the whole logic. I also don't find it. That doesn't give me much joy to talk about all the logic. I'm going to give you the only little bits we need to kind of discuss the solution. And one thing that's important here, grounding. One notion here is this sort of, it's a third principle on your handout, that if you have a bunch of premises that show that there is a time relative to which something is the case, you have another set of premises relative to which you can show that there is a time relative to which something else is the case. So let this be B and let this be D. You cannot jumble all those premises together and show that B and D are the case. So given certain premises, if certain premises imply that there's a standpoint relative to which B, you have some other set of premises that show that there's a standpoint relative to which D. You cannot take all these premises and thereby infer B and D, because you're not guaranteed that there's a single standpoint to which B and D are both the case. So it's almost as if you kind of try to kind of navigate this weird inclusive reality, and it's almost as if your reasoning pushes you into a standpoint or pushes you into a different standpoint, but you cannot sort of take your lines of reasoning and sort of collect it all up. Not using ordinary conjunction. I'll get back to this. I've already used this notion of being pushed into a standpoint. I think it's really helpful to introduce a notion of a certain representation, a sentence, a proposition, a thought, belief, to describe what things are like from a certain standpoint. So this is just I'm going to take this as a sort of stipulated technical notion. So if I say there's thunder, okay, I'm going to say that sentence describes what things are like relative to any time, relative to which or at which there's thunder. So if you take a temporal standpoint, then a sentence that describes something that obtains relative to that standpoint, I'm going to take that representation and say that it's from that standpoint, that it describes what things are like at that standpoint. This notion of from a standpoint can be really confusing. I sometimes regret taking that locution. The notion is not that the representation is, of course, produced at that standpoint or produced at that time. It's just that it describes what things are like from that perspective, from that time. And in that sense, it's from that standpoint. I won't use this notion, but I'm going to mention it briefly. I think that we subjects, in standard semantics and standard thinking, we're always taken to be very intimately tied to ourselves and to the current time. And I think that's, from metaphysically speaking, that connection is too strong. I think we're able to engage in sort of theoretical descriptive thoughts and yet adopt alternative standpoints. It's almost as if you're facing me, you say, oh, the pepper's on the left, or the salt is on the right. I can go along with you and say, yes, the pepper's on the left, right? Even though I'm opposite to you, I can go along with your perspective, as it were. And in that sense, when I represent something, when I entertain a proposition or a representation that is from that standpoint in this technical sense, then I can be said to adopt a certain standpoint. So you get a technical notion of what it is to adopt a standpoint. And I think what we can do is we can switch standpoints. We're not tied to, we're not sort of anchored to the current place in time or to the current moment in time. So when I describe these facts here, when I describe that I'm standing, I can adopt the standpoint of T2, and I adopt the standpoint of T2 by describing myself as standing. You might think that this creates very mistaken predictions about ordinary language, ordinary talk. I'll get back to that. There's a little bit of machinery that helps with it. I'll get to that later. Okay, so now with this notion, with this new notion of logical consequence, we can introduce or create the concepts that can help us describe this this sort of inclusive sense of reality. So, for example, it helps to have an external cross-perspectival conjunction. And for that, you have introduction and elimination rules. So when there's an A standpoint relative to each A, an A standpoint relative to each B, you can infer that A and externally B. And externally, I will use this as an ordinary way of expressing this cross-perspectival conjunction. Notice that that is given in terms of ordinary classical logic, but the elimination rule is always given using this new notion of logical consequence. So from A and externally B to B might be a case where you're switching standpoints. It's almost if I say, I say, I'm sitting and externally I'm standing. If I go from that external conjunction to I am standing, I now adopt this standpoint of T2. This is why whenever you have an inference where you might be switching standpoints or adopting new standpoints, you use this this introduced notion of external cross-perspectival logical structure. Similarly, it helps to have a sort of cross-perspectival conditional. The introduction rules is simply that if you have the claim or if you have the premise that if A, then there exists a standpoint relative to which B, then you can introduce that it's the case that if A, then externally B. This is the introduction rule for this arrow there. And the elimination rule, again, is given in terms of this external cross-perspectival logical consequence notion. If A and then externally B, you can infer B, but you might be switching standpoints again. You might be pushing yourself into a standpoint somewhere. Now, in terms of ordinary talk, this would be a mess. This would not be good because basically, if we're talking and I say, "Oh, it's sunny," or let's say it's not very sunny, and I say, "Oh, it's super sunny. It's really warm, blue skies." Your inclination would say, "Oh, that's wrong. It's a mistake." Your response won't be, "Oh, we're adopting this standpoint of a few days ago when it was sunny and blue skies." And what that shows, I think, is that we need an additional bit of machinery in our semantics, maybe the notion of a focus. And here I'm relying on the work of Finean. He introduced this sort of notion of focal semantics, or the notion of utterances having a focal content. A focal content is basically a specification of the bit of reality to which truth will be responsible. I'm not going to read out a quote. But the idea is this: in an ordinary conversation, there will be a focus. Okay? Almost as if a context comes with a focus. And the focus determines relative to which standpoints the content needs to be the case. So you might have, and this is a very ordinary standard case, normally the focus will be the here and now. We are parochial beings. We're not sort of all the time, constantly very metaphysical and unrestricted in our ordinary talk. So as an ordinary default option, when I say, when I just sort of out of the blue say, there's a blue sky and it's very sunny, we're going to assume that the focus of that is the here and now, and or not just assume, but it is the case probably that the focus is here and now, and then that statement would be false or incorrect. Okay, so you get this notion that the Stoker statement is true if and only if what it states obtains relative to one of the standpoints that lies from the pluralistic standpoints that counts as the focus statement. And I take that focus to be determined by pragmatic factors. So let me give an example. So imagine a sort of history class, and you have a very sort of engaging history teacher, and he always gives these sort of immersive classes. And he comes in, he starts, Napoleon is 51, is on St. Helena, He's overthinking his line. And the class doesn't go. The class isn't like the sort of unmasked response isn't going to be no, he's not alive. He's not 51. He was 51. That's not going to be the response. The class would go along. It'd be like, okay, right. There's Napoleon. He's 51. And if the teacher would have said, oh, he's 65, he's sitting on St. Helena, the class is going to know. I'm sorry, teacher. Wikipedia says that he died at the age of 51. It's just a mistake. So this is not imagination. We're not imagining things like different standpoints. There's practice conditions. You can make mistakes, and I take that to be this is descriptive. This is a representation of theoretical thing. Okay. So I'm going to take so for example, your being in a history class can be the sort of context that allows the focus to be something other than a current moment. And I think there are a certain just an entire conversation shifting in a certain way, or a conversation taking very long, such that time has passed, but you're still talking about the moment when the conversation started. Right? So at some point you're making utterances that are for which the focus is start the conversation. I also don't typically. I think this idea of the time of utterance, I think is that's nice for our models and idealization, but there's no such thing as the one time of utterance. There's going to be a cloud of times relative to which that's going to be the focus of your statement. So that helps to kind of recover ordinary talk. Then I think metaphysics, as metaphysicians, we are interested in the inclusive sense of reality. And this is very familiar in when we do metaphysics, we kind of lift these restrictions in what we're interested in. So I take it that when we're engaging in metaphysics, there won't be restrictions in the focus. We're focused on inclusive reality, reality in general. That's what we're interested in when we do metaphysics. Okay, so that's the picture. I know that this is a lot to take in. It's a complicated picture. So I'm not going to introduce this problem, and I'm going to give a response to this problem. And I hope that helps to clarify at least one bit of the picture. Okay, so what's this problem of dense token truth? There's different ways of specifying this problem. I'm going to take a very slightly flat-footed, simple statement. Let me just read this out. I think that's easiest because then you can read along. So say I utter Lucy is sitting at some moment, when Lucy is indeed sitting. My statement there and then is true. Okay. I'm saying Lucy is sitting, he's there sitting, true. Now I'm talking about a particular token utterance, so this specific utterance. Now, this particular token utterance, my saying, my uttering, or my statement that Lucy is sitting, doesn't change what it says when Lucy stands up. It's a token utterance, that specific utterance, and it's individuated by its content. It's the utterance that Lucy is sitting. That's the statement that I produced. Now, so it doesn't seem to change to what it says. It doesn't somehow to update its content as time goes on. And also, I want to say, it's plausible that this specific token utterance doesn't change its truth value when she stands up. This token utterance. It's not as if I produce a statement that Lucy is sitting, and then it's not that this thing that I said yesterday when she was sitting suddenly becomes false when she stands up. This thing that I said yesterday is a truth. Okay. Now, if my token utterance of Lucy is sitting, which I made yesterday, is still true today, and it's still true, and it still says, or it still has the content, it still makes the claim that Lucy is sitting. So we have something that's true at this time. It says that Lucy is sitting at this time, and it seems that it is true that Lucy is sitting. Well, then Lucy is sitting. We're assuming that Lucy is currently, she's not always sitting. At some point, she needs to stand up. Okay, so she's standing up. we get a contradiction or there's something off. Now take the sort of general principles that are at work here. So one, I'm taking two of these labels from the statement that Finean gives, and the other one is slightly related. It's closely related to as well. But token content stability is this idea that if at a certain time a token statement states that A, or if the token statement states that A when it is produced, and at any time at which this token statement exists, it continues to state that A. The statements don't sort of change what they say as time goes. Token truth stability. If token statement S is true when it is made, then any time in which this thing exists, it is true. I produce a truth. It's that thing that I produced yesterday, and it's a truth. It remains true. And then there's this kind of notion of a truth release, of course, related to Tarski's schema, and going in one direction. If a token statement S at the time, sorry, there's a relativization. If at T, the token statement states that A, and it is true, then at T should be the case A. Now, if you take all these principles, then it seems that you get something odd, given certain assumptions about the existence conditions of token utterances, token statements. So, just going through the premises. Premise one, I make the statement S1 that Lucy sits, and we assume the statement is true. Sitting, and I make the statement. Given this first premise and token content stability, at any time at which this token statement exists, it continues to state that Lucy sits. By this first premise and token truth stability, at any time at which the statement exists, it is true. But then by token release, you get at any time at which this token statement exists, Lucy sits. And that seems the statement. It seems that we can have this token statement, it being a truth, and yet Lucy standing. There's the discussion to be had, of course, about these principles. So people have argued that token statements do update their contents. It has been argued that token utterances very narrow truth sort of existence conditions. They kind of flicker in, flicker out of existence. If you say it, then it's there, and then you can stop your sentence and it's gone. This sort of view. But of course, there's different kinds of ways of resisting this argument. There's a bunch of premises. What I want to do in the final 12 minutes is simply go through this picture again and outline how that picture responds to this problem. And my preferred response is to deny relativized token truth release. Okay. So this was the principle that said that if at T a token statement states that A, and at that time that token statement is true, then at that time A. And I think that's false because the antecedent, so at a certain time, the token statement being true and stating that A, the antecedent might be true at one time, where A itself is the case at a different time. Okay? In other words, if you go from the truth of a token statement to endorsing its content, you might be switching standpoints. You might be adopting a new standpoint. Typically, the standpoint of the time at which the token utterance was produced, taking the natural ordinary view. So, and this is just sort of part and parcel of that focal semantics that I've outlined. So you would, that semantics already gives you that we should deny this principle. It's an independent reason, not this little puzzle, but there's an independent motivation for dropping that broken foot piece. So if it's ordinary, in an ordinary context, an ordinary statement of Lucy sits, will have as its focus the narrow correlative moment roughly around the time of utterance. Okay, sure. But given the right context, as I've argued, that focus could be other times as well. So just take the case of the history teacher starting class with Cleopatra wakes up in the morning, just a big day because da 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 da. And that context, being a history teacher, being a history class, automatically allow you to just be like, okay, the focus of that statement is that time in the past, and we're tying the truth of those statements to which things were the case at that time in the past. But then, given that picture, you will have, if you go from the truth of those utterances that are being made, that you shouldn't expect to be able to do that and still adopt the current moment in time. So if you take the current truth of those utterances, you're not stopping the history teacher. So you're going along, so you grant, as it were, the correctness of those utterances. Because you're well aware that you've adopted a different point. You're, as it were, the entire class is speaking from the perspective of a certain time. That will give you independent motivation to reject Ratifi's truth release. And then the argument doesn't go through. Doesn't go through. You don't get to premise report. Now, of course, simply rejecting this principle, I think, is not not good because well, it's truth release. It's an important principle that characterizes our conception of what truth is. You want to say that if this thing is true and if it states a certain thing, then one should be able to endorse the thing that it states somehow. You're making contact with realities. Okay. So I think it's really important to recover a notion of truth release. And I think the notion that we can recover is a notion stated using this external version of the conditional. So you do get, for example, a principle like external token truth release, also in the handout. Oh, I've forgotten to move the. Sorry, people at home. Watch this. This principle external token truth release, which says if a token statement S states that A and S is true, then externally A, and then externally marks that by going from the truth of the statement to the content of that statement, you might be switching your standards. I mean, replacing yourself at a different point in time. So you do get a statement of truth release. It's just it needs to involve this external version of the condition. Okay, so just to wrap up, there's this somewhat strange, non-standard, highly non-standard conception of time. I think we ultimately don't do justice to that conception of time if we stick to our ordinary conceptual tools. I've always thought that we need to introduce some kind of conceptual machinery. I've come to think that we need to kind of introduce quite a lot of conceptual machinery. It might sort of give you the suggestion that it's a highly complicated view. I don't think it's as complicated as it might seem, but it does involve the basis for introducing new logical connectives. So in that sense, it's complicated. But given these logical connectives, you can then sort of logically navigate this perspectival world, being constantly aware that if you make inferences, you might be sort of moving around in the inclusive reality and adopting different standpoints as you make your inferences. And given that's the case, you can actually jumble all your conclusions together. Given the picture, you need a certain way of making sense of ordinary talk and ordinary thought. It's going to need this sort of focal semantics. Given that focal semantics, we have independent motivation to deny truth release. If you deny truth release, I think you also automatically avoid this problem of the problem. That's it. Thank you.
All right, that was short and swift. So we actually have 25 minutes for questions. So hands up, start there, keep them up until I nod at you. Yeah.
Just to see if I understood correctly. So suppose now I say well, I'm a dinosaur and I'm going to eat you. And you say, no, please don't eat me. Okay. Then it seems that we shift the context from an actual one to a fictional one, and you play the game with me. And if it is so, then my problem is, why don't you do the same with respect to the temporal operators? So the idea is that in this case, we already have a device in order to do that. We allow for modal operators that shift the context into a fictional one and so on. So why don't you do the same thing with respect to temporal operators? Is it clear, the question?
Yeah, I see the question. So I think the idea is sort of we can do this sort of thing with, for example, merely possible things, and then we should play, like we can engage in sort of acting as if we're in that merely possible world. Why don't you do this to whatever is going on there with time? I think the main reason, and this is not going to convince you, I think it's because there's a big distinction between time and modality, and sort of where you, I mean, where you draw the distinction between play and imagination and what your metaphysics is like will be entangled. So anyone is going to say, look, now you're just maybe playing or imagining or talking about something that's really possible. You've now gone outside of the bounds of reality.
So the teacher is doing the same.
So my claim is, and let's just go also a picture of writing that claim, is that we should not do this.
Okay.
Yeah. And here's something that might help you with the intuitions. The moment you do this sort of thing in mere play and mere sort of possible worlds, there's no correctness anymore. You can make up anything. I'm a lump of wood. You can sit on me. The child should sit. Like you can go all over the place. And there's no such thing as saying, hey, if you make a mistake. And I'm saying if you're truly engaged in adopting perspectives and actually existing temporal points of view, that puts a very sort of puts claim on you, and you go wrong and right. Whenever there's a sense of correctness, I say, well, then that's a very good reason to think that we're somehow tying everything to reality. So that's sort of a little bit more motivation, but.
Yeah, that was a very rich paper. I just want to ask some questions or make some observations about the purely logical part of it.
I've given you very little of the logic.
Okay. Well, maybe too much, actually. I want to distinguish various issues here. I mean, one is we can just start. Let's do it with sentential logic, something with predicate logic, and we can now imagine that every sentence letter has an argument. It's really a monadic predicate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where the variable here is a standpoint. It's taken to be a standpoint. Now, what we can then do is define a notion of validity, which we can look at the x. We've got some statements A, 1AN, and we want to know if B follows. Now this is hidden. This is extra variable, so we just look at the existential corresponding existential statement. There is an x such A of x, A1 of x. There is an x such A2 of x. Okay, so and then want to know whether we can further infer that there is an x such that. Okay, that's one way of doing it, just by translation. I mean, you can also just imagine that there are a number of different models depending on what x is. So, so then that is a definite question as to what the consequence relation is in that case. It's actually the subvaluationism in vagueness. Okay, so this actually is just that's formally speaking just the same thing actually. Yeah. So people have worked out what the logic is for supervaluationism, where you have universal statements of x. I don't know if they've ever worked out the logic for the. So that's a simple logical problem. Namely, if you've got an existential interpretation.
Yeah.
Now you actually wanted to go on and do more than that. One is you wanted to think, introduce new connectives. So I don't know if they're meant to be alternatives, but I assume there are new connectives. So instead of interpreting A and B as there is an X such as AX and BX, you interpret this, there is an X such as AX and there is an X and BX. So that's a further complication. We've introduced these new connectives. Then you wanted to be explicit about the variables as well.
Yeah.
So that's taking, so there are at least 3 different levels of logic here. For each of them, one needs to work out the semantics, what the logic is, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I thought there was just an interesting logical project here of working through these various.
And I hope someone will will answer to that call. But I think one thing that's about the sort of the very first sort of level of taking sort of hidden argument places and working with that. One thing that I dislike about that is it sort of implicitly makes all statements always kind of this form. So it's almost as if you're always implicitly talking, like you said, so you get sort of you fill the empty argument places with there exists an X such that at X ... Or you just fill, or you always take T1s and T2s or standpoints to sort of go into the implicit empty argument places. It almost makes all talk always only of this sort of being sort of implicitly time specific. What I want is exactly this distinction between the time specific talk and sort of the claim that I'm sitting at T1 and the claim that I'm sitting, and these being different propositions, different claims. And then, so this is why I'm pushed up, at least in your levels of logic, I'm pushed up towards more complicated stuff. Yeah.
I just say something. I think you're misunderstanding the role of these existentials.
Okay.
The point is this, that if I make, there are some premises A1, A2, which might be asserted from different standpoints.
Right.
And then I infer B, which may be asserted from some other standpoint. That inference is only going to be valid if the corresponding inferences involving the existentials are valid. So this is perfectly compatible with thinking that when you make a statement, it's made from a certain standpoint. It's just the validity of the inference will turn on whether whether the corresponding existential inference is valid. So
I'd be interested to see. And one thing that if I can mention one thing, I think if you take this sort of each premise to sort of simply make this statement of there is a standpoint at which premise 1, there's a standpoint at which premise 2, and then you look at what follows, very little follows. You get very little. If I want a simple modus ponens, A becomes there's a standpoint at which A, and if A then B becomes there's a standpoint at which A, if A then B. It's not guaranteed that there's the same standpoint. So
I think more follows than you.
Okay. Oh yeah, well I need to.
Okay.
Because,
So, for example, you can go from A to A or B.
Yeah, but so like this like for one of the very first subvaluations semantics, Jaskowski there. You don't even get modus ponens. You don't even get.
So you may not get certain things, but that's not to say you get very little.
Thanks, Martin. So this is giving me an indication to say a little bit about the responses. So I actually, I'm pleased to see, I don't know if you're attributing this to the person or whether he accepts it or not, but I just have a reaction that, but he endorses it, we just discussed it. I've never agreed with Philip, so people think that's happened to know. Yeah, so.
No, this is actually your defense.
Oh, okay. So take statements, sentences, utterances, truth bearers, roughly the same, but there are some important differences. Certainly an utterance is a verb, right? So it ends, like once you finish uttering it. Whenever you encounter a sentence that might put you in mind of that, that's getting a new tokening of it or something like that. So yeah, the challenge of the problem, you say response to deny the persistence of the token statement. Once an utterance has been uttered, it's no longer there to be, it's no longer there persisting as a truth value bearer. Consider it a new token.
Yeah, it's definitely something there's. I think there's also different versions of that response that we can look into. But I think in terms of the actual existence, I think sometimes people are misled a little bit by the auditory sense that we have of utterances. So if I really token a sentence by saying, I'm standing. This token here definitely lasts longer than this fleeting moment. And it seems that that token doesn't sort of suddenly does something weird when it is, doesn't pop out of existence. The tokenings, especially if you want to be liberal about what sorts of representation of things we can token. It seems if you want to go this way of all these things pop out of existence, I think that's going to be quite a demanding view on what truth layers can be and what tokenings. I see, for example, for this tokening here on the board, it will just stay there, and I can sit down and stand and just exist. It doesn't care about what I do. So I think it's I think there's, when you think purely about utterances, there's maybe something. I think there's one interesting view about it, or sorry, let me say like an interesting alternative variation of this. Is that you might think that okay, you might say to me like, oh, okay, I'll grant you the existence of these tokenings or these some tokenings, but maybe not their remaining contentful. So somehow there. I produce this thing and it's contentful when produced, but given a certain stretch of time, it becomes a mere blob of ink. It's something that was contentful, that made the claim that. So you get kind of tokening that sort of continues to exist, but it's having content is somehow strictly removed. And that feeling is certainly interesting as well.
Yeah, so quick follow-up and then I'll leave it.
Yes, really, just for the same reason that someone might want to say, take their fundamental truth value bearers to be something abstract, like a proper proposition. So I'm thinking of Brenton Merrick's in 2015 here. The idea that something concrete like an utterance or a sentence or something written can't be the fundamental truth value bearer because it's this concrete, maybe contingent thing that it doesn't always exist, it can cease to exist back. That's why when you put utterances and truth bearers together over little sentences. Truth bearers are these more permanent, maybe abstract things, sentence, utterance, token. I want to say those are kind of transitory, maybe temporary things. What you just started to say there at the end about losing content, I think I could be quite sympathetic to that. But from within the perspective of like tensed truths, a dynamic view, formless change, fundamental change is going to be a ceasing to exist, a ceasing to be true. I think that's going to really be important for the opening.
I mean, I would take issue there with the notion of the fundamental truth bearers. Fine, let the fundamental truth bearers be like that. Then there are these truth bearers, non-fundamental. These things are still true. Still, things are maybe not fundamental, but they still make a claim. And so the argument doesn't involve fundamentality or non-fundamentality. So bringing in that notion doesn't help in such. We still need a view of the non-fundamental things that makes sense.
Slightly glib comment, but I mean, I was thinking of a couple of examples. So this is very sort of artificial, but you can imagine, you've written some diary, or you can imagine you're holding a sign saying I'm standing, and then when you sit down, it does seem that it's false.
So you produce.
It's a standing sign.
Yeah. So I think so. One thing that's not here, I would resort to the flexibility that's allowed by that focal content. Here's another example of that sort. I write a note. I'm writing. I'm not here now. I stick it on my door. It's not as if while I'm writing it, it's false. When I produce it, it's false because I'm right there writing it. Stick it on my wall, but of course the intention is that it's focused on the times at which people will come to my office. That's the time that the truth should be focused on. That's what the truth is tied to. And so I think this sort of focus is really important, where it's going to be very shifty, and holding a sign up and standing, it might be that it's a kind of stretch of time. I don't know, or yeah. I think language is just very messy and we need this kind of flexibility to kind of make sense of all these different sort of cases. It's not unrelated to people having a phone call and saying it's raining here And the other, oh, that's really nice. That it's raining, but here it's super hot. And you kind of go along with these claims about here. Well, this person cannot simply endorse them, translate it somehow, or what's going on. It's a super messy thing. So these sort of cases I think it's interesting also with regard to this token, these sort of cases. It's also interesting to think about the opposite case. You produce, I say I'm sitting. It's not as if I kind of go like, oh, now what I said just now it has become true. It's just strange. It's not as if I can make the previous utterance true by sort of because the focus there clearly was the current time in which I was. It's just a bit all over the place.
I don't know if this is the question with finger, but you've
Well,
got one.
Yeah, just one thing. Okay. So, okay, then let me just focus on your response. So this doesn't seem to be a very general response, right? Because you're just saying that we might, in certain cases, shift perspective, but then again, we might also not shift any perspectives. So in those cases, you'll still get your contradiction, and this doesn't seem to be, a general way of avoiding the worry. So unless you're saying that in each such case, there must be a perspective shift, the bare rejection of the relativized token truth release principle doesn't really solve the problem.
I think that's true. I think that's, but the work that's being done is I can see your point, but the work that's being done here is basically by how we set up the case. So we've granted that we have a truth. Given the focus semantics, that means that that what I say obtains within the relative focus. Relative standpoint is targeted at. To get a contradiction, I need a time at which that thing is not the case, right? And then endorse the content, and be able to endorse the content without switching standpoints. So problematic cases are exactly those cases where you have a truth and a time at which that thing no longer obtains, but that is sort of that. Just the setup of the case will guarantee that there's a standpoint switch. So I don't need to kind of build a restriction into the semantics, but just the problematic cases are such that they will involve switch, otherwise you don't get the contradiction.
Also,
Well, we started with a lot of time for questions. We have 5 more questions and 7 more minutes, so I would no more follow-ups.
Oh, quicker.
For Bruce.
Yeah, so it seems to me that the conceptual resources that you invoke right from the start are not really new, and actually they don't go beyond what we have in standard temporal logic. So your funny consequence relation can be defined in terms of the classical one and this operator of and the conjunction, the external conjunction, can also be defined in terms of that, and the implication, right? So also your external truth release principle could be formulated just with material implication and the sometimes operator at some x at x a. So I didn't really quite see why it was useful to provide these definitions and to introduce the framework in order to get to your solution, given that you could formulate your solution just by saying, well, the principle that I accept is the release principle with the material implication operator and the standard sometimes operator.
I think what's I'm not 100% sure, but I think what's doing the work in the background is but let me not say that. I mean, I might say that at the end of this. I think that the important thing here is this: I want to be able to distinguish these sorts of claims and these sorts of claims, and I want to be able to say that these can be full-blown facts, proofs of this they obtain. Dot. That's what I want to say. And the thing is that if you characterize the logic purely in terms of everything that we have, you will end up only making claims about this stuff. So you only make all this, and you get a really theoretic picture. So it's by adding these facts, insisting that these are different facts to describe and to state, that these are part of the metaphysics, you need to be able to not say there is an X, there is a T such that P. That would be if I use the ordinary resources for P. So I want to be able to make these claims and not conflict myself. And this is why this framework kind of, it's just ultimately just pedagogical and elucidatory. And how can I say that I'm sitting and then in the same metaphysics room say that I'm standing as well? And I think these terms kind of allow you to kind of do that. So there is a kind of, I'm going to insist on the real sort of difference between these sort of time-specific claims and these claims, and that's what's doing the work. The alternative logic, if you really endorse it or accept it or internalize it, you will come to conceptualize it as sort of moving around in this space with the simple facts and not here. And that would be the result if you only stick with the depth sort of definitions. I was going to say at the very start of my response that in the background is a hyperintentional sort of assumption that the theory sort of necessarily correlated and necessarily putting things that I distinguish. That's doing a lot of work. Because you can kind of move back and forth, but you'll be moving back to different facts. So your metaphysics will be incomplete if you only have the one way of talking. This is very rough, but knowing you a little bit, I think you can proceed.
So I find your response 4 very interesting. So our response 4 is to deny true stability and accept instead that the token statement changes its truth value across time. You said that you don't like this response, but I find it may have interesting connection to the present problem. The problem that we don't have knowledge that this is this is the present moment. So one important premise for that problem is, for example, Caesar believes that he is crossing the Rubicon. That belief is true once, but false many times. So if we reframe this in terms of a belief, so true stability can be used to block that premise, right? Because Caesar's belief that he is crossing the Rubicon is always true. So the present problem is blocked. So, but on the other hand, if you really like to get the present problem working, that would be a very good reason to deny true stability, right? So I wonder what your take is.
I have a quick response, but that's interesting. That's thank you.
Okay, I want to understand a little better the picture, and so a simple question. It seems that you're harnessing the resources of a B-theoretic picture at the relativization level, right? And then you go in A-theoretic up there with the primitive tense facts. And it's not, you'd never said it, but it seems very hard to see how there could be an explanatory order. So they seem to be independent. So the simple question is, are you not only disunifying reality, but also disunifying time, in the sense that you have very fundamentally and independent different temporal structures that are both operating in this picture? I mean, typically we would say, with one of those structures and try to understand moments in terms of primitive tense, or the other way around. Yeah. You have both, and you think that it's, of course, it's fine. You need it for that, but is that what I'm?
This is, yeah, that's fair, and I think, I mean, the full response would involve a long methodological rant about
Really
fundamentality. Yes, because so. I think what bothers me a lot is that people work with sort of specifying their metaphysics in terms of what is fundamental. And I find that problematic because there's all the non-fundamental stuff, and for especially perspectival sort of conflicts seem to be very plausibly to happen also at the non-fundamental level. In fact, some people like Bernard Williams and some others take perspectival conflicts to be a mark of non-fundamentality. And so add fundamentally this stuff, add that to the picture. This is fundamental. Then you say, oh, I've now become sort of somewhat more theoretic because of this fundamentality claim that's added to this. Perhaps, and now add the fundamentality at the top layer and do the little grounding errors different direction. Now I've become more atheoretic. And to me, that's just a different discussion. I do think that fundamentality will need to be factive if it's possible. So if fundamentally P, then P. And now, if you get all kinds of P's and Q's, then we need to somehow make sense how these things relate and how these things can be fitted in one picture. Yeah, so this is a little bit of a tiny little methodology.
Okay.
Yeah, getting along.
Sorry to everyone who did not get their question, get a chance to ask or have their question answered, but that's great.
Thank you so much.